Do you miss your grandmother?
I do actually, yeah, I do miss my grandmother. And my grandfather, particularly being in Windsor. For me, Windsor is hers. Sometimes I'd come round and have a bit of tea with her because she had the best teas ever, so I used to get well.
Do you ever wonder what a queen leaves behind when she has already given away her crown, her palaces, and her name? Not the jewels, not the titles. Something quieter than that. Something she never let anyone else see. On a gray morning in early spring, the royal household of Aldenmore received a 2-paragraph statement that few outside the family were meant to read. It named Prince Corwin, second in line to the throne, as sole beneficiary of an estate almost nobody in the kingdom had ever heard of. Not Brenholt Palace, not the summer pavilion at Vestmark. Something older, something that had been hidden in plain sight for nearly 80 years, wrapped in silence by a woman who understood, better than anyone, the difference between what is public and what is sacred. This is the story of that estate, and of the 2 people who believed, right up until the very end, that it belonged to them instead. In 1943, in the middle of a war that had already swallowed half of Europe's certainties, King Edmund III quietly purchased a stretch of land in the northern hill country, far from any road worth naming. He called it Ashwood Reach. There was no ceremony, no plaque, no mention in the royal ledgers that historians would later comb through for clues. For nearly 8 decades, Ashwood Reach existed only as a rumor among the oldest members of the household staff, the kind of story passed along in kitchens and stables, never confirmed, never denied. When the briefing notes describing its contents were finally shared with senior court officials, even those who had spent their careers inside the palace admitted they were unprepared. Ashwood Reach held a small stone chapel with a private memorial to family members lost in service. It held archival rooms stacked with wartime letters, family diaries, and correspondence between 3 generations of monarchs and the statesmen who shaped their era. It held dozens of portraits that had never been exhibited, never been photographed, never been catalogued anywhere outside a single leather-bound inventory. And it held something rarer still. Recordings made privately over the decades of the old queen, Queen Miriam, in conversation with the great and difficult figures of her reign. One archivist, asked to describe the collection afterward, chose his words carefully. It was not a museum, he said. It was the private memory of an entire family, kept in one place, protected by people who understood exactly what they were guarding. What made the bequest to Corwin remarkable wasn't only what he inherited, it was why. Between his 20s and his early 30s, long before anyone expected him to matter dynastically, Corwin had spent countless private weekends at Ashwood Reach with his grandmother. Not as a guest, as a hand. He cleaned frames. He repaired shelving damaged by damp. He spent long afternoons refiling decades of correspondence that had fallen out of order, reading enough of it in the process to understand exactly what he was protecting. Queen Miriam noticed. In a note later found among the estate's sealed documents, she had written, "He will inherit more than a title. He will inherit the quiet, and he already knows how to keep it." To understand how Ashwood Reach could pass to Corwin without so much as a ripple in the official record, you have to understand the legal instrument Queen Miriam built around it, a private trust established years before her death, held entirely outside the normal channels of crown property. It was witnessed by her personal solicitor, a single trusted notary, and no one else. The trust carried a condition. It would only activate once her state funeral had concluded and once Corwin had been formally recognized as an adult working member of the family. Both conditions were eventually met, and the transfer went through exactly as she had designed it, quietly, irreversibly, and entirely on her terms. Not everyone in the family greeted the news with grace. Queen Miriam's second husband had died years earlier, but his widow's role in the family, her stepdaughter-in-law, a woman named Odalise, and Odalise's adult son, Fifer, had spent the better part of 2 years positioning themselves for exactly this kind of asset. Publicly, Odalise had floated the idea of a heritage retreat on royal grounds, something she described as a celebration of the kingdom's culinary and literary history. Privately, according to people close to the planning, the vision looked considerably less sentimental. A members-only lodge, a branded food label built around estate honey and aged cheese, curated retreats for wealthy foreign guests. Fifer, for his part, had gone further still, quietly exploring whether portions of any newly discovered royal property might be reclassified under heritage protection law, a maneuver that would have forced shared stewardship onto whatever Corwin was eventually given. Ask yourself what that sounds like: a tribute to family legacy, or a business plan wearing a legacy's clothing. In the months before the Ashwood Reach announcement, Odalise hosted a private gathering near the river, ostensibly to celebrate rural conservation. Guests who attended later described it differently: as a trial run for a public-private partnership that would have let outside investors share control of whatever estate came next. Corwin was invited. He declined, politely and without explanation. 3 weeks later, the Ashwood Reach Trust activated, and Odalise learned, along with everyone else, that the estate she had been quietly angling toward for years had already been spoken for by a woman who had died 2 years before Odalise ever started planning. Ashwood Reach was not the only property in question. Weeks earlier, the land registry had quietly recorded another transfer that caught Odalise entirely off guard. Farrow Hollow, a 1,200-acre estate in the Western Hill Country, historically used for private diplomatic retreats during Queen Miriam's reign. What made the transfer unusual was its timing. Documents dated years before the Queen's death showed she had reclassified Farrow Hollow from shared crown property into a personal holding, a change that let her leave it privately through her will rather than through the ordinary line of institutional succession. In her own handwriting, in a private annex to the will, she had written, "Let this remain with the one who carries our future forward. Let it be sanctuary, not simply shelter." The decision bypassed both her surviving son, now king, and her eldest daughter. Palace historians called it the first transfer of its kind in over a century. Odalise, it turned out, had not been idle either. She and Fifer had spent 2 years quietly courting outside investors, a hospitality group from abroad, a boutique hotel consultancy, for a plan to convert Farrow Hollow into a luxury culinary destination, a 5-star lodge, a cooking school built around the estate's history, and a full rebranding as a countryside retreat for wealthy travelers. An internal feasibility study had valued the estate's licensing potential in the tens of millions over a decade. One courtier, granted anonymity, put it simply afterward: Odalise believed she had won the estate through influence and patience. The Queen had planned 2 steps ahead of her, and did so from beyond the grave. The most personal chapter of this story surfaced when Corwin's aunt, Princess Yusult, was reviewing Queen Miriam's private correspondence and found a sealed letter tucked inside a leather folio marked simply with Corwin's initials. Inside was a directive concerning Thistlewood Manor, a property purchased decades earlier by the old king, designed specifically as a private refuge for direct heirs, insulated from politics and public attention. Queen Miriam's instructions were unambiguous: "I leave Thistlewood to my grandson, in full and without condition. Let it remain outside every ledger, immune to scandal, immune to commerce. This is not property. It is a promise." Those close to the family believed the wording was a direct response to years of tabloid controversy surrounding more distant relatives, a wish, in her final years, for at least one corner of the family's legacy to remain untouched by gossip or profit. Odalise, when she learned of the transfer, did not receive it as sentiment. Her son had recently lost a licensing deal after his food brand became entangled in a minor scandal involving unauthorized use of the family crest, and Thistlewood looked, to her, like an opportunity rather than an inheritance. Within days, a new company had been quietly registered, with Fifer listed as its director, built around a proposal to convert the manor into a countryside hospitality brand. The paperwork was drafted before anyone realized the transfer had already been formally notarized weeks earlier. The plan arrived too late to matter. When details of the proposal leaked, mock-ups of the manor's historic facade rebranded with a corporate logo, projected valuations, glossy investor decks. The response inside the family was immediate. Corwin confronted Odalise directly during what was meant to be a quiet family lunch. Witnesses described the exchange as brief and unambiguous. "This house does not exist to be branded or sold," he reportedly told her. "It's the last untouched thing of hers, and I intend to keep it that way." Odalise left before the meal ended. The newly formed company was dissolved within 2 days. The last piece of Queen Miriam's design came in the form of Oakenfell, a modest hunting property that had served, more than any palace ever had, as her actual home during difficult family moments. It carried no grand valuation, no headline-worthy price tag, and yet, in its own quiet way, it mattered more than any of the others. It was where she had gone to think. It was where Corwin had spent childhood summers learning, long before he understood the word, what stewardship actually meant. The transfer came with a clause few had anticipated. Any challenge brought by someone outside the direct bloodline or married into the family would be automatically void. When that clause was read aloud to senior relatives, the room reportedly fell silent. Odalise left without a word. Fever, according to one account, cursed his own legal team on the way out. That evening, Corwin walked the grounds of Oakenfell with his own children for the first time as its steward. His eldest asked him, standing at the edge of the old orchard, whether the estate would belong to their family forever. His answer was simple, only for as long as they took care of it. A final letter arrived days later from Queen Miriam's solicitor, containing one last passage in her own hand. If this is ever challenged, let it be known, Oakenfell belongs not to power, but to patience. Let it be carried forward by the one who bore the weight, not the one who wanted the crown. Step back from the individual estates for a moment and look at the whole design. Queen Miriam did not simply leave property to her grandson. She built a structure around him, estate by estate, clause by clause, engineered to withstand exactly the kind of pressure that eventually came. She anticipated the business plans. She anticipated the legal maneuvering. She anticipated the public campaigns dressed up as heritage projects. And she built her answers to all of it years before any of it happened. That kind of foresight raises an uncomfortable question. Why did she feel it was necessary? The answer, as uncomfortable as it might be for the people it concerns, seems to be that she recognized, within her own family, priorities that had drifted away from stewardship and toward something closer to brand building. She chose Corwin not because he wanted the responsibility, but because he had already shown, quietly and without an audience, that he understood what the responsibility required. Corwin's response to each challenge along the way was remarkably consistent. He did not hold press conferences. He did not issue public rebukes. He signed the paperwork his grandmother had prepared, and he let it speak for itself. It spoke loudly enough. As spring settled fully over the hill country, and the last of the estate transfers were formally recorded, the family's private battles quieted, not because anyone had won an argument, but because there was no argument left to win. Every scheme, every proposal, every quiet campaign for influence had been anticipated and answered by a woman who had spent decades thinking several moves ahead of everyone around her. For Corwin, none of these properties are trophies. They're responsibilities inherited from someone who trusted him precisely because he never asked for them. For Odalise and Fever, the story ends not in defeat exactly, but in the quiet recognition that the game they thought they were playing had already been decided, in ink, long before they ever sat down at the table. Queen Miriam understood something that took her family considerably longer to learn. Legacy isn't measured by what it's worth. It's measured by who can be trusted to protect it, even from the people standing closest to it.